everybody, welcome back to philosophy. Today we're going to be talking about what is horrendous natural evil. Definition. The problem of natural evil is something that many scholars, theologians, or just average people have wondered for a long time. And the problem is this. Why does good, all-powerful, all-knowing God allow bad things that do not stem essentially from human agency to affect his treasured creatures? In this response, I will look at people who experience natural disaster and whether this was firsthand, secondhand, thirdhand, and I'm going to show their own individual answers to the problem presented that they found through their own methods. And at the end, I will share my own take on this. Bowler, their definition of the problem of natural evil, or the answer to it, is that suffering reveals the suffering of others. Some context to this. Kate Bowler was notified of having stage 4 cancer shortly after giving birth to her son and living what she referred to as the perfect life. Bowler continuously reiterates the phrase, "good things happen to good people," as this was her mindset when she first learned of her tragedy. A quote from her is, "It is a hard thought to accept that we are all a breath away from a problem that could destroy something irreplaceable or alter our lives completely." The interesting thing is that she talks about finding love through these circumstances that she went through. She goes to talk about how other people who experience tragedies like brushes with death find a sense of love too. She felt more connected to others who went through similar things and called this an indescribable kind of love. Another quote from her is, "My own suffering began to feel like it had revealed to me the sufferings of others." So, in summary, Bowler concludes by talking about how suffering will happen, we will go through horrible circumstances, but that there's also going to be natural beauty and love. And next we're going to talk about Hart. His answer to the problem of natural evil is that natural evil is part of a larger narrative of creation and redemption. All suffering will make sense in the context of divine love and redemption. Some context to him, David B. Hart wrote this essay after a devastating tsunami that hit the South Asian coastline in December of 2004. Hart starts by saying that he would not blame anyone for feeling resentment towards God or whatever force one believes runs the universe after the tragedy that struck. But he also states that nothing they learned from this event about finite existence was anything new. A quote from Hart is this, "To speak as if believers have never until this moment considered the problem of evil or confronted despair or suffering or death." So he says that in response to people saying that believers really don't understand the scope of disasters and they just explain it off as it's all God's plan. So he wanted to reiterate his stance on that and make sure that they knew that he did not agree with people saying that about believers. Hart writes this essay addressing many other responses to natural evil, such as Voltaire, which we read about earlier this semester. His strongest argument against the claims presented is that of Jesus' life and resurrection on earth. A point he makes that I really liked was that God incarnate, or Jesus, came to this earth to break the chains of our fallen nature, or sin nature. Some believe that God requires us to suffer so it can reveal their attributes. And while I will say that this definitely brings people to be more willing to come before God through a time of trial, I wouldn't say that he makes this a necessary thing and a necessary part of life for us to find him. But some people get lost in this and they believe this sentiment. They want to blame the wickedness of this world on the one who created it, instead of realizing that our own original sin is what truly brought evil into the world. And one more quote from Hart is, "It is precisely sin, suffering, and death that blind us to God's true nature." And lastly, we're going to talk about Lewis, our favorite, C.S. Lewis. And his answer to the problem of natural evil is that suffering allows one to transform and become aware of their relationship to God. Suffering leads us closer to God. So some context to this is that C.S. Lewis was a renowned writer, creating many works. And one of these works is The Problem of Pain, where this answer is derived from. So Lewis argues for the case of free will. Because he believes in free will, he believes that God made us this way so we could experience true feelings of love for others and God. But because we have this choice to choose, it brings along problems of when people choose to do something morally wrong. And with these problems of people choosing to do this, there's another issue that arises. The rest of the world is now under the laws of freedom. This is where order and balance of nature comes in. But since it's a balance, there must be disasters to offset the order. That's where that balance comes in. Quote from Lewis is, "Try to exclude the possibility of suffering, which the order of nature and the existence of the world involves, and you will find that you have excluded life itself." Lewis makes the point that by wishing for a world without suffering and evil, we are actually wishing away our own free will. This free will is truly what makes life feel like living. Some other quotes that stuck out to me from Lewis are the following: "If tribulation is a necessary element in redemption, we must anticipate that it will never cease till God sees the world to be either redeemed or no further redeemable." And "The human spirit will not even begin to try to surrender self-will as long as all seems to be well with it." And let's talk about some differences between the three of these different answers here. So one difference that I noticed was that Hart and Lewis contrast because Hart takes the stance of denying the theory that God requires us to suffer so it can show his attributes. And since Lewis took the stance of suffering revealing our relationships with God, these two have a point of contention. Another difference is that Hart took the answer that does not necessarily seek to give an objective response. He responds that evil is a large concept that we cannot understand without seeing the bigger picture. Bowler answered as if she knew the bigger picture well and wanted to give a positive reason for what she's been through. Lewis explains that these evils will draw us to God. These two give a stance that does not require a bigger picture to understand, so pretty much contradicts with what Hart was talking about. And then some agreements. So on the other hand, all three answers were similar in that they all pointed back to God's sovereignty. While Bowler spoke on God revealing other situations through her own suffering, and Hart touched on God coming to earth to relieve it from its present evil. And finally, Lewis spoke about suffering helping draw us closer to God and his love. So all of these have themes of pointing out the sovereignty of God in all situations, even in the situation of natural evil. And also both Lewis and Hart agree on nature having its own sin issue, not just humans. Through both of these, you can see that we weren't the only ones who suffered and are suffering because of sin. The Bible even says that creation groans because of the weight of sin. We sinned, this corrupted us. We sinned, this corrupted the earth. We can be evil because of our corruption. The earth and nature can be evil because of its corruption. These two agree on this point. And to conclude, I have my own take on this. So when I was reading these separate answers to the troubling problem that I found myself pondering over quite a few times before, I've really wondered and thought about this kind of problem before too. Just growing up in the church, you know that God works everything for good, but sometimes as you get older and you really realize what other people go through and just some disasters that happen on earth that there's no way that someone's sin could have caused that, you really start to wonder, why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? And why does he allow evil to happen to those who didn't deserve it? So I came up with my own stance on the matter. I agree with Hart's stance in his answer to the problem of natural evil. As I was saying, as an adult, I do find it hard to just trust that God has everything worked out and it will all make sense in the end. I've had to use that line actually when trying to talk to my friends about why God allows evil into the world. But it is true. Redemption is an overarching theme of the Bible. Similarly, it is an overarching theme of the world itself. The world was created to be good and to inhabit good, pure things. When we committed the original sin, we tainted the world. It now needs to be redeemed to be free from evil. The world itself is no different than you and I, a helpless thing that can only be saved by God's unconditional love. So, Hart is correct. In this context of redemption, natural evil is part of a larger or overarching theme of the world. And continued, I felt relatively neutral on Lewis's stance. I do think that by going through trials and experiencing suffering, we can be led closer to God. I also think that some experience these kinds of tragedies and without understanding their purpose, hate God for them. Another reason I had against this answer is that I believe people can be led to a close relationship with God without having to suffer. You can see the story of love and the love God has for us in sending his son to the cross for our sakes, and that alone is enough to accept Jesus into your heart. I could see both sides of this argument from Lewis, so I'll say that I felt neutral on the topic. I do, however, disagree with Bowler's take. She argues that suffering reveals the suffering of others, and while it is true that experiencing a loss of some kind can reveal to you the losses in other people's lives, I don't really think this is a good enough answer to natural evil as a whole. I can feel and empathize with others because of their situations, and it's not required that I have to go through the same situation myself to feel this emotion. I don't believe that God allows evil to just exist just for the reason of connecting people to each other. And here are my works cited. Thank you for coming along and watching, and I will see you guys next time.